Welcome to Brave Together Parenting, an empowering and truly helpful podcast for the parents of children with disabilities and all unique needs.
There was just that waiting period of waiting for God. And I just remember, I can't wait anymore. I need intervention. And I knew God was with me the whole time. But at some point, if that's not working, you have to take action yourself.
Hello, Brave friends. I'm your host for this episode. It's Jessica Pate here, Brave mom and the founder of the nonprofit We Are Brave Together. And today, since we are interviewing a couple and they are each sharing their story on the episode today, for the story episode, I thought, maybe I should share a little bit about my husband and I. We've been married for 27 years. So yeah, half of our life we've been married, and longer than that, we've been together. And, we were very intentional from the beginning about not ending up a statistic, and it's not easy. Our marriage is definitely not perfect. We have had our highs and lows and our issues and ongoing issues. We've definitely been to therapy, and I've done a lot of individual therapy to keep us going. And I heard a statistic that 94% of parents battle depression or anxiety who are parents in this altered parenting journey. And I would say that Chris and I err on the side of anxiety, that we definitely battle anxiety in this journey, and just as humans. So these story episodes are true stories from a moment in the life of a caregiving parent. We hear a crafted story, and then we have a conversation with our storyteller or storytellers that goes deeper into their experience. Today is a little different, like I said, because we have two guests, Chris and Sandy Colter, both who have submitted stories about their own battles with depression while raising their autistic son. Their son, Bryce, had a brain hemorrhage that caused seizures when he was just over a day old. And just when they'd weaned him off the seizure medication at age 2.5, he got an autism diagnosis. Chris and Sandy wrote a book together called Parenting Autism: The Early Years, and have been very open about the ups and downs of their caregiving journey to all of our benefit. A quick reminder, friends, to please subscribe to our podcast, share with fellow parents, leave a review, and join our Facebook group. Follow us on Instagram. And if you want to see the faces behind this podcast, look for all our episodes this season on YouTube. We thank you so much in advance. I'll let Chris and Sandy take it from here.
Depression. Where do I start? It sneaks up on you like a bad tsunami. Bryce was getting older, and I could see how different he was from the other kids. It was obvious now. There was no more denial from family or friends. I was on an urgent path of researching autism and what I could do to fix it. I was now Bryce's taxi service, to and from therapies and schools. I was supposed to be the breadwinner of the family. I was supposed to be in control. As men, we are the fixers. We fix things, then we move on to the next thing. Instead, I was at home dealing with behaviors and things I couldn't fix. Researching autism led me down many different paths with no surefire way to lead to healing or recovery for those on the autism spectrum. I also lost my relationship with Sandy. We were just trying to make it through each day with the least number of meltdowns. We would meet up at night only to be too exhausted to talk or even function. Bryce was my sole focus because he desperately needed my help. I was sad for him. I was sad that he could not function and have fun like other kids. I was sad that the light at the end of the tunnel was just a train coming in my direction. One day while picking him up from ESE class at our public school, I buckled him into his car seat like I always did and got ready to start the engine. But then I realized I had the opportunity to talk to his teacher since all the other kids were already gone. I wanted to find out how Bryce was doing in class. My keys were still in the ignition when I got out and locked the door. I always lock the door when I exit my vehicle. It's just a habit. But this time my precious child was inside. What had I done? 50,000 things went through my brain in a split second. My phone was in the truck too. I quickly asked his teacher to call 911, then I called Sandy. She had a 40-minute drive to get to the school from work. Luckily, it was a mild day in South Florida and it was not hot inside the truck. The police officer showed up and didn't have any tools to open the door. He would have to break the glass. When I told him Sandy was on the way, he said he thought we could wait it out until she got there. All the while, we kept a sharp eye on Bryce to make sure he wasn't in any distress. Poor Bryce, it really hit me right then. He was in his own world. He didn't even know what had happened. We tried to tell him to unbuckle, but he was just oblivious to the situation and really anything that was going on around him. It really affected me. I wanted to cry. I locked him in the truck, and it was a big, fat daddy fail, 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 fail. I was a failure. It seemed like an eternity waiting for Sandy to arrive. I couldn't get the keys from her fast enough. We unlocked the truck, and Bryce was none the wiser to what had happened. Before it even dawned on me, I was becoming very sad and withdrawn. Eventually, I felt like waves were crashing on me, and I couldn't stay above the water. Wave after wave would come, beating me down. I was lost, without hope. Sandy started to notice, and sometimes she mentioned my depression symptoms, but she didn't know what to do for me. I felt on the verge of just giving up. Just one more meltdown, one more thing added to my plate, one more unexpected event, and I was going to check out. As a Christian, I leaned on God. I was seeking Him, trying to find relief. I felt like I was in the desert with no oasis in sight. Where was God? Why wasn't He helping me? Why weren't things getting better? I knew He was with me, but I still felt very alone. At this point, I just didn't care anymore. After all, I wasn't making a difference. Who would care if I wasn't around anymore? Sandy had my life insurance policy if something were to happen. I looked at it to make sure she would still get a payout if I checked myself out. I knew people would miss me, but it didn't matter. I was stuck in a small box that I couldn't get out of. Then it hit me. I suddenly recognized that I was in a depression cycle. I decided that I couldn't wait for God anymore. I didn't know what His plan was, but it wasn't moving fast enough for me. I was at a point of no return. It wouldn't be long before I was going to be pushing up daisies. I just knew it. I booked an appointment with a psychiatrist, thinking that I would be talking my problems out with him. Instead, he asked me some questions, hit me with a prescription, and told me to call if I didn't see improvement. Otherwise, he'd see me at the follow-up. In less than 20 minutes, I was out the door wondering what just happened. Fortunately, after a couple of weeks on the medication, I started to see the light. I no longer felt crushed. I started functioning again. I was getting over the hump. The healing continued, and I was back on track after a couple of months on the medicine. Eventually, I was able to wean myself off of the medicine and maintain a good outlook on life. I never wanted to go back to that feeling. It was horrible. Soon after I was back on track, Bryce spontaneously said to me, "Daddy, I want to go to Home Depot." I couldn't believe my ears. Up to that point, it had just been 1 or 2 word utterances we were getting from him. I was so excited. I said, "Absolutely. Let's go right now." I wanted to celebrate the milestone, and at the same time, I wanted to show him that if he made a request like that in a full sentence, it was going to get top priority status. He had shown a big interest in appliances at big box stores previously, so it was no surprise when he led me to the washers and dryers. I let him open and close all the doors and press all the buttons for at least an hour. It was a glimpse of hope, just when I needed it.
Depression. It had only been a couple weeks since Bryce was withdrawn from his kindergarten class at his school due to lack of support, and it was the first time that I lost my feeling of hope. I was hoping that Bryce would be able to streamline into a regular classroom as I had seen with other autistic children. It did not happen for Bryce. It was Bryce's 6th birthday that led me a little deeper into my depression. It was the first year that we had invited a friend to celebrate. He had formed a really sweet relationship with Michael and was beginning to recognize friendship. The boys were both excited to be together. Everything was rolling fine until Bryce opened up his gift that was an astronaut outfit. Bryce was very interested in outer space and wanted to be an astronaut. We could have never guessed what his reaction would be when he got his spacesuit. Being literal, he thought he was going to space in his new suit and would be leaving us. Poor guy. I didn't know what he was thinking at the time, but I could tell that he was no longer engaged in his party or with the other gifts. In the meantime, Michael understood how parties worked, and he was happy to help Bryce open the rest of his presents. He was so excited and happy while Bryce was with us physically, but had completely left us in every other way. I broke my own rule that night. I compared Bryce to Michael. Warning: comparison is the thief of joy. My thoughts began spinning out of control. The race to recovery that I had created in my mind had ended. The age 5 timer that ticked in my head had expired. If you're not familiar with autism, there is a significant amount of chatter in the autism world about the importance of early intervention. My understanding was that we had a window of time between ages 2 and 5 to get Bryce all the help possible before his brain changed into a different phase. I thought I had failed Bryce in some way. I pushed for him to have the chance to attend a regular kindergarten classroom, and it failed. I told myself at that moment we were not going to be one of the families that would get to talk about recovery. We would not be able to say one day that our child no longer fit his autism diagnosis. Bryce would be Bryce, and he would continue to ride the roller coaster. In hindsight, Daddy's school was God's plan all along, not mine, and has been perfectly tailored for Bryce and Chris. Best plan ever. I bounced back from my little funk pretty quickly. I just had to grieve a little and accept a few things. I regained control of my thoughts and continue to just trust God's plan one day at a time. I told myself to leave all possibilities of Bryce's progress in God's hand and to genuinely embrace Bryce's autism. I left my false hopes and my negative thoughts in the dust. I began to open the gifts of autism, which completely changed life in many beautiful ways. Depression had visited our home earlier on our autism journey before it knocked on my door. Chris really struggled with depression for a long period of time. He was our primary researcher, which took him down some dark alleys of information, speculation, and desperation. With no definitive treatment or cure, it can be very overwhelming, and he was our protector, and he could not protect Bryce from what was happening to him. Chris's depression affected me too. I felt like I was walking on eggshells and trying not to break them. I didn't want to say the wrong thing, and I only wanted Chris to get the help that he needed. Chris sought professional help, which was the right thing to do in order to eventually help him through it. Thankfully, he responded well to the medication provided. He also opened up with his feelings to his men's group from church, which brought his depression out of the darkness and into the light for healing.
I am so grateful that both Chris and Sandy were willing to share about their struggles with depression, which are so common, especially in this community. No one should ever feel ashamed if they struggle with their mental health. This is such an understandable reaction to the realities of caregiving on top of parenting, and we get it. This interview does lean religious or into faith waters, so just know that going in. But the idea that we need to wait for God to heal us, which I think is present in many religious communities, comes up. And it's so important to talk about because that idea can keep people from seeking the interventions that they need to stay alive. And Chris is with us today, our guest, because he took action and he reached out for help. Now, please enjoy my vulnerable conversation with Chris and Sandy Colter. Hi, Chris and Sandy. Thank you for submitting your stories.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hello.
This is new for us to have a couple on and to have two stories in one story episode, but I was drawn to it way back when, and then there was kind of a lull between last season and preparing for season 7. So thank you for your patience, and I'm so glad to have you today. Why don't we start by just having you all introduce yourselves and your family story and where you are recording from?
Okay, who wants to take this?
Sure. Well, I'm Chris, and this is Sandy, and we're from Port St. Lucie, Florida. And you can do the rest.
Okay. The woman has more words, you know. So we have our son, Bryce. He is 10 years old, and he was diagnosed with autism when he was 2.5. And prior to that, Bryce had a brain hemorrhage, grade 4, the day after his birth, which no one still can explain why that happened. So we kind of rolled into the special needs parenting the day after our son arrived. And he was on seizure medication. He was in the NICU down in Miami for 10 days. They thought it would be months, but he was our little miracle. We got to bring him home a few weeks after he was born, but with a lot of instructions and machines and medication. And he really thrived very well with all of that. We got him weaned off of that when he was just before his 2nd birthday. And we thought then he was just going to flourish. And then I started seeing things that didn't look right, and he wasn't getting more words. In fact, he started getting less words and losing his language, losing his eye contact, started doing what we learned to be flapping. Didn't know what all that was, but we all thought it was related to his original brain injury. So we were going down that path for answers when the autism diagnosis kind of came unexpectedly. But that's what it was. And then with time, he's been in a lot of therapies, and we've had a lot of help, and we do a lot of the natural remedies, I guess you could say, or treatments with supplements, and Chris is our chemist guru with all of that and does a great job.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one and
We understand.
But we've done a lot, and Bryce has a great team that has supported him. He's, I would say, level 2 now. He definitely can have a conversation, but most of those are about what he loves and his interests, and he still struggles if it's outside of his normal box, I should say. But he does really good. We homeschool him. That's been a blessing. That's worked out really well. And we did start a podcast as well back in 2018. It was called Parenting Autism, and it was really an outlet for me. And during that time, Chris had just come out of depression, and I was like, would you be willing and able to do this with me? Because I got to get this out. So I thought it would be better if we had one that was a male and female perspective, a mommy and a daddy, because we think differently. We're both wired differently, and you have to figure out how to work together, on this journey. And so I wanted it to appeal to both the moms and the dads, and the wives to help understand the husbands better, and the husbands to help understand the wives better, because again, we all kind of process things differently. So it's been a real blessing for that. And then we also wrote a book just because we wanted to share the first 10 years, and it's Parenting Autism, the early years, because we know those earlier years are the hardest. They were the hardest for us.
And the most critical.
Yeah, and the most critical, trying to,
get everything in place.
You're running a race in your mind to try to figure all this out, and can we turn this around in some way and get him all the help that he needs? So that's kind of in a nutshell where we're at.
Oh, thank you. Chris, do you want to add anything about your family story before I continue?
Yeah, I think when we got the diagnosis, I was the researcher. So guys are generally the fixers. And I wanted to fix it, of course. And after going down rabbit holes, I figured out that you can't fix it. It's just one of those things that you just have to do the best you can. And we're a great team. We work together well. And she goes along with a lot of the stuff that I recommend and find. Which is helpful. And it is, a lot of it is trial and error, and that's how we roll.
Okay. So many questions. Well, one, doing the podcast together, has it brought you closer?
Yes. I think doing the podcast, we talk about things that have happened. Let's say there was a meltdown that happened. We talk about it on the podcast and what we did during that meltdown. And so it gives us time to reflect on, okay, was that the best way we handled that? What could we have done better? And a lot of times there's things that we forget during the week that happened or that we need to tell each other, and it comes out spontaneously in the podcast. And I'll be like, oh, okay, you didn't tell me that. But it's good for that too.
Oh, that's great. So I was really drawn to this and my editor as well, because I know we've had moms touch upon their burnout. I know that we've brushed on the topic of depression, but you both submitted your stories, your own experiences, your experience of the other, your experience with Bryce. And it's so important to talk about because I know that so many parents are battling depression and certainly anxiety, whether they battled it before and it's exacerbated with the circumstances or brought on by the circumstances, which is so understandable. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about our mental health. So thank you for being open to share. And this is a little bit of a tangent because I wanted to say thank you for being so honest. But, if you had diabetes and you wanted to talk about diabetes, I wouldn't say thank you for being so honest to share about your diabetes. It's just, kind of accepted and expected that we do talk about our physical ailments. And I wish it were the same for our mental health because people are silently suffering because there's still stigma. And so the more we talk about it, the more we have brave, and I just use the word brave.
Yeah.
We have
It's
people
true.
share about it, the less stigma there is, and people will say, I'm not alone, and it's okay to talk about this. So did either one of you have a history of depression pre-kids, or was this brought on by the intense circumstances?
So I would say for myself, I may have had a hint of depression in high school. There was a significant matter that happened. And I can remember looking back now, like, wow, I must have been a little depressed because I can't remember. I blocked out a lot of memories. I remember gaining a lot of weight, and my dad had a heart attack at the end of my junior year. He was only 41. And I remember that really kind of shaking me out of it. Like, at a very young age, at 16, I got a new perspective on life, which I think was good for me in that way. And so after that, I went through some tough times, but I never really felt that darkness of depression, except maybe through the miscarriage, but nothing where I ever needed medication. And even with our circumstance with Bryce, I didn't need medication. I didn't feel like I needed to go and talk professionally, but I could feel it coming, and I had to really pray myself out of it. So I was glad I had the awareness, but I probably had more awareness because I had watched Chris walk through it.
Yeah, and for me, I did struggle with it. After my first marriage ended, you get married young and you're like, okay, this is it. We're in it for the long haul. This is what it's meant to be. And it's all roses and everything. And then it doesn't turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out. And I was left with a lot of debt. And, your dreams come crashing down. And so I did go see someone for that. And they did put me on medication for, a short period to get me over that hump. And so that was part of the reason why I recognized it again when I had it with Bryce. And so, yeah, I did have a history back then. It was quite a few years ago. So, but it did come back.
Mm-hmm. And how did you encourage or strengthen the other, or were you actively talking about your own depression and trying to encourage the other? Were you avoiding it? Because it would be, if I talk about it and talk about how I'm struggling, you're already struggling and I'm struggling, so I'm just not going to talk about it. Did you take the avoiding, route, or did you, face it head on with each other and really, really try to encourage as best you could? When you're low energy and low emotion, it's very hard to rise up to cheer on another person. So what did you guys do?
Yeah. So Sandy, she kind of internalized it in the beginning. And to be honest, I really didn't know that she was going through it. So I didn't really know until she came out and told me, and we had discussions about it. And she didn't know what to say when I had it because she didn't want to trigger anything, like making suggestions or you can talk more about that.
Yeah, I could see something was going on, and I was not in a place of depression at that time, which was good. So it was kind of like we weren't both down at the same time, to like what you referenced, but it was still hard for me, for sure. I had my own emotions I was dealing with. I was watching him and I knew I was losing him. He was just in a whole other space. And so one of my best friends, she has battled depression herself and with her husband as well. So she was a really good source for me to go to, and I could open up to her, and she loves Chris and knows Chris, so it would be without judgment. And so I would say, I don't know what to do. What should I do? Because you've been through this, I haven't. So she would help me kind of know how to bring it up, but bring it up gently. You recommend that maybe it would be a good idea if you go and talk to somebody. Maybe you can talk to me, but if you're not comfortable talking to me, you can go talk to somebody else. So I kind of planted seeds. I could only do so much to take stuff off of his plate, but I would always offer, is there any way I can help you? What's on for your agenda today? Can I help you in any way? And at that time, I was working full time and I was gone for the majority of the day. And it just worked out that I was the one that was called to work outside the home. Chris was the one that was home. And I had my own stress points there that we don't need to go into. It was challenging, and then I had the guilt of not being able to be with Bryce and with Chris while I had to be away and try to balance all of that. But I could only do so much. And so Chris was taking him to the therapies. I think going down some of the rabbit holes that he went down, things that were way beyond his control and really didn't affect us. But, negativity breeds depression. So the more you're reading negative things, hearing negative things, all of that just fuels and takes you down faster than, it's like an undertow in the ocean. You don't even know it's taking you out. And so I try to encourage him to read less news, maybe not go down all of those paths. Let's focus where we are now, not worry about the future as much, but just try to gently do those. And then I was very grateful when he was finally willing and able to go get some help. And that's what he needed.
Hi everyone, it's Jessica here, and I just want to give a shout out to our top 5K sponsors: Rise Advocacy, GHJ Foundation, Torrance Memorial Medical Center, CMS Creative Management, MRM Education, Harbor Light Financial Strategies, the Pate Family, and PPL. We are so grateful to these big sponsors, and we're so excited about our 5K event, which will really be a family event. It's going to be at Palos Verdes High School on Sunday, October 20th. And we also have another in-person event in San Diego, October 19th. It will be wheelchair friendly, it will be family friendly, it will be stroller friendly. For the Palos Verdes High School location, we're going to do laps around the track together. We're going to have a DJ there, a food truck, coffee cart, vendors, authors, and artists. We cannot wait to see you, so please save the date and register today and be a part of the big We Are Brave Together team. And if you are not local to these events, you could do your 5K anywhere in the world. We thank you so much for participating and supporting We Are Brave Together. And Chris, were you receptive to Sandy with any suggestions, encouragement? Did you feel defensive? Did you feel like you don't understand? Or, were you open? Were you soft and pliable? Or, I can imagine all the different ways that you would explain.
I think in the beginning, I didn't really recognize it. I didn't recognize what I was going through. And I would say when she first started mentioning it, being a guy, I can do this myself type of mentality. And when I just physically felt like these waves crashing on me and just being pushed down, I can't even put it into words exactly how I felt, but that was the turning point. Like, if I don't do something now, then it's not going to end well.
Yeah, I'll have to say, when we were writing the book, it was my project that I took on. I really wanted to do that. And then he's like, well, maybe I want to write something. And when I got to the chapter about working through all of the steps of grieving, and I got to the loneliness and the depression, and I asked him, I said, would you be comfortable with writing something in the book about this because I feel like your story will really help a lot of people. Mine's minor, it's still real and it's still, I felt what I felt, but it never felt completely beyond my control. Where you went to a place that you needed help. And
that was the difference. It was beyond my control.
Right. And people do need to hear that because it's, as you pointed out, it's like viewed in a bad way. And we're people of faith that go to church and you're brought in church. And so even in his men's group that he would go to, I'd encourage him, like, maybe talk to them about it. But not even everybody is receptive to that. They're like, well, I don't get it. Don't you have faith in God? Well, it's not just faith in God.
I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you saying that. I come from a faith background too. And you can't just pray it away. And or just, read your Bible or, go to Bible study or what have you. Yes, those are practices that are helpful. But when you are suffering physiologically, biologically, clinically with depression, it has to be addressed differently.
That's it.
For sure.
So thank you for not being afraid to say that in your circles. It's really important because I think people are suffering because they're afraid they're going to be judged because of their lack of faith or lack of faith practices or what have you. And you can't, anyways.
Yeah.
Enough said.
In the beginning, I felt like I could lean on God. That's what I felt like. Okay, God has this. I can lean on him for the answers. And I tried that. And there was just that waiting period of waiting for God. And I just remember, like, I can't wait anymore. I need intervention is what I need. And I knew God was with me the whole time. But like you said, you have to, at some point, if that's not working, you have to take action yourself to,
And I'm so glad you did. And I'm so glad you said that in your story as well. What practices now that you're over that hump, both of you, are there practices now in your day-to-day life that you've incorporated to support you and to buoy your mental health that you would love other parents to know about?
Well, I think that it's not something that just goes away because this is something with Bryce's autism that we're going to have as part of our life, so it's not like something that it's temporary and then you move on. So I think I came across this term the other day that's called chronic sorrow, and it kind of resonated with me. Have you heard of that? Yeah.
No, but
okay.
That's great.
So when this was described, they were saying, you go through your things of depression or you'll go through a deeper sadness, but then you kind of bounce back and then you're rolling along and then there's something that triggers that deep sorrow that you feel. And there are times that you may look at Bryce, or I hear him trying to say something that he just doesn't know how to say it, or, you fall into that trap of comparing him to another child that's nearby, or how I remember being at 10 years old, which now I can kind of compare my childhood memories to where he's at, and you can't do that. And I just feel like there's that chronic sorrow that can come back. So you have to be vigilant at all times. So in my office space, I have Bible verses like written on index cards and all around my space. And they're good for me, and I'll change them out. And, there'll be days that I'll just read that and I'll be like, okay, that's where I need to be in this space. And definitely our prayer life is part of it. I think talking about it is important, and working on our marriage as a continual project is a part of it. I think the book, writing that was very good as well, and kind of reflecting on a class we did at church that was helpful. We just recently got another book that's kind of taking us through the steps again. And I just think it's something we'll have to do from time to time to just make sure we don't get sucked into the whirlwind of autism and life and all the other things that are pressing for our time, pressing for our thoughts, pressing for our energy, and making sure we stay in a happy place. I will say with Chris, he does have a tendency. I'm going to speak for you. He does have a tendency.
We do that for each other, don't we?
Yeah, right. We've been married 19 years almost now. So he'll be drawn more to news, and news is so negative. And so I try to say, like, maybe stay off of that Facebook page, because that was just kind of a negative thing. And I can tell when he's kind of going down the negative spiral. And again, it's a delicate it's a delicate walk, because you don't want to make him defensive or hurt him. But yeah.
She has all the Bible verses posted all over her desk. But when I do that, they're more like decoration to me, and I don't read them. It's they're there, but I'm concentrating what I'm doing in the office, whatever project I'm working on. So that works for her, doesn't really work for me. But I think the fact that Bryce is communicating with us better now, he's doing better, I think that directly correlates with my feelings. And there's a big difference from feeling good the way I do now and where I was. And so for me, there's not, I guess it does trickle down to that low point, but there's really no in between for me. Like, I feel great now. I'm back on top, and I really don't feel sad like I used to, and I don't feel depressed like I used to. When there's a hiccup with Bryce, I'm like, okay, we can work through this. We know how to do it. And, he's not like neurotypical kids, of course, but he's a great kid. He's very joyful, and that brings joy to us, So I feel like I'm in a super good spot now. I don't really have those sorrowful episodes, and I'm definitely not in the basement anymore as far as feelings go. So I feel like I'm in a really good spot.
Okay. I want to add to that just a little bit if I can.
Sure.
I do agree. He's in a really good spot right now. And I think that's because of the conversations and the effort that we're putting in. But another big change for us was that I really felt called to leave my full-time job to spend more time with Bryce and with Chris. And so when I really felt that laid on my heart, I gave my notice. I gave them a very long notice, and we were able to just kind of strategize so I could take a few months off to spend time with them. I do think that has helped tremendously. And I think being aware of that and following those things, even though it's a huge step of faith. And, I think a lot of people feel like they can't do that because they need 2 incomes or they need this, but we've just prioritized that our family is first and God will provide the rest, and it'll all work out. So since I've had that time off, I've been off full time the past 4 months, and I have just seen a world of difference. And I think that's helped Chris because I've taken a lot off of his plate.
Yeah, she's really taken, she'll take him to therapies now, and I'll go work part-time. And she's doing some of the homeschooling now. I'll do the core 4 subjects, and then she'll do the things that he needs extra help on. She'll do the Bible class. So things have been delegated more evenly as far as Bryce goes, and it really has helped having her at home. And I know a lot of people out there that have children with disabilities. They are, sometimes they have to be home, right? So they're looking for those at-home work opportunities. So we're just dabbling in a lot of different things that are what you're saying?
Nickels and dimes.
Nickels and dimes, they add up, right? So that's what we're doing. We're getting a nickel here and a dime there, and it's adding up, and it's able to prolong her staying at home, right? So, and hopefully we can just make it all work out to where she can still be here, as much as she is now. So we're very grateful for this time.
Yeah, I'm just prioritizing around them.
So what I'm hearing, overall is 1, be very careful about what you consume, which I think for all of us is really important, whether that's social media or news or reading way too much about the diagnosis or going into Facebook groups and diving deep. I think we have to be very careful how much, we consume. What I'm also hearing is that you figured out stressors, you figured out what was contributing to your stress and your load and what you needed to do, what you felt called to do. And you followed that, you honored that. And then just continuing to talk about it, continuing to share about it. And one thing that I heard you say as well that, gosh, we should do an Ask Us Anything episode on is it's really hard to not ride the highs and lows of our children, their highs and their lows, and let it affect us. I don't know. I feel like I'm a little bit there, but it's really hard to separate our own hearts, our own emotions from how well our kids are doing or not doing. Yeah, that could be a whole episode.
Yeah, that's true.
But not getting knocked down like a tsunami, when our child has a really rough week or a really rough day, or we get a phone call from somebody, or, you have an experience, you're homeschooling and like it was the worst day ever, it's like, how do you not spiral down, right? The other thing I heard you say in talking about chronic sorrow is just normalizing that. Mm-hmm. It's normal to have the chronic sorrow when you have a chronic hardship, chronic condition in your life. And I call it cyclical grief. The grief in altered parenthood is cyclical, and it doesn't mean you haven't done a lot of healing work. It doesn't mean that you haven't accepted your child's diagnosis and accepted that this is your life and you'll be the best parent and do the best job that you can. It just means that those grief buttons get pushed again from time to time, and that is okay. And that is so normal. And I think once we recognize that, then we'll stop beating ourselves up like, why am I sad still? Or why am I getting upset? Or why am I feeling resentful again? It's normal. It's normal. But if you're stuck, then it's time to call for help, right?
Right.
When you go through phases of it, I always called it the wave, like, oh, I'm feeling the wave of grief, right? Mm-hmm. And then the wave goes away, it moves out to sea. But if it's stuck, if I'm just, stuck in it, then I have to talk to a mentor, talk to a therapist, talk to somebody,
Yeah. And I call it like, let's bring it to light and not leave it in the dark, And so he will tell me now if he's feeling sadness. And that's a huge thing because especially men, they have a harder time discussing emotions. But I'm always happy when he's able to tell me that he really feels that, because then I kind of know how to respond and to help. I
think another thing that helped us was we implemented date night. So we get together alone and we're able to talk, and communication is number one. You have to be able to communicate with each other and tell each other what's going on and how your day really was, instead of just fine,
Right.
So, but that's really helped us too.
Yeah, open discussion and creating fun opportunities. So, like we even just started going to play pool, like billiards pool.
Fun.
For like an hour or two.
Yes.
It's right by my mom's house, so we can take Bryce there and he gets to stay with my parents and we get away for a couple hours and listen to some 80s music and shoot some pool. It's been great, right?
I love that.
It's not expensive, but it's just carving out quality time together.
That's it.
And it's time to play. Like, I just keep hearing more and more people talk. We have to play. We have to play as adults. We have to. It helps us access joy when we play. So good for you.
Exactly.
Good for you. Well, one question we were asking our guests this season are, what are ways that you are showing kindness to yourself?
Well, getting a massage this week.
Yay!
That's me.
Yeah, and I kind of do the same thing. I think kindness for myself is sometimes like giving myself grace, like emotionally, is being kind to myself because I can't do everything and I'm not perfect. And that is a kind thing. And then I do try to take care of myself. Like I'm a hot bath bubble girl, and then I'm a spa girl. So I do like to have some treatments here and there, but I think it's also just being kind to myself mentally as much as it is even in physical ways.
Giving yourself grace. I
love that. I love that. I have the word grace on my wrist as a reminder.
Oh,
that's my word right now that keeps coming to me. So that's good.
That's awesome.
I needed that reminder that God's given me the grace to be the best mom that I could be.
That's it.
Because I had this put on 10 years ago, and we were in the thick of it with Ryan, and it was so hard, and I doubted myself, and I can't do this, and all the things that we feel when we're going through those really rough times with our kids, and so I needed that. And I had it put on there. So It's been so nice to spend this time with both of you. It's such a pleasure to meet you. And I thank you for all that you're doing. And thank you for your podcasting, your book, and for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We appreciate you having us on.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. Do us a favor and leave us a review and a rating so that this podcast can get into the ears and the hearts of more and more moms. Did you know that Brave Together Parenting Podcast is an extension of our nonprofit organization, We Are Brave Together? We Are Brave Together serves an international community of caregiving moms, offering support groups that are virtual and in-person, educational resources, and low-cost weekend retreats. And we have published our first anthology of caregiving stories entitled Becoming Brave Together, Heroic, Extraordinary Caregiving Stories from Mothers Hidden in Plain Sight. It will encourage and validate every parent caregiver. To join us today, go to wearebravetogether.org. Our support and sisterhood awaits you. Brave Together Parenting Podcast is for entertainment and education purposes only. It's not a substitute for professional care and should not be relied on for medical or mental health advice. The use of any content on our podcast, links, show notes, or on our website is to be done at your own personal risk. Please seek out a professional to assess your own medical or mental health concerns because we are all beautifully complex and the content of this podcast is for a broad audience.